Good afternoon, and welcome to IAM Online for February. We are just now getting underway for this afternoon's webinar, The Year Ahead in IAM. We appreciate your joining us for today's IAM Online, which is the monthly webinar series brought to you by InCommon and Internet2. As we get underway, I want to just share a few reminders with you about today's program. There's our agenda. Right now, we're having the welcome and so on and so forth. We will be taking questions and comments using the Zoom Q&A function. And we will hold all of our questions until the end of today's presentation. So if you do have a question, we encourage you to pose it using the Q&A function there in Zoom, as that'll be our primary mechanism for fielding your questions this afternoon after all of our presenters have given their talks. Also, feel free to post messages in chat. And also, we will be recording this webinar. If you registered for IAM Online, you're going to receive the link to the recording via email. And the recording and slides will also be posted on our IAM Online webpage and YouTube channel soon. With that, once again, welcome. And I am going to pass the virtual podium to Ann West, our moderator for this afternoon, Internet2's Associate Vice President for Trust and Identity, to tell you more about today's presentation.
Great. Thank you, April. As April said, I'm Ann West, AVP of Trust and Identity and Executive Director of InCommon. So welcome to today's webinars. April gave you kind of the backdrop of, hold your questions till later. We're going to run through a bunch of really super interesting trends that the InCommon Catalyst will be presenting from you. So the things that you should keep in mind about the Catalyst, and the next slide, please, is who are these folks, right? These are organizations, primarily companies, that essentially have a business alignment with higher education and research, and are interested and participate in community work across the InCommon community. They participate in the advisory groups, help draft best practices alongside campuses and other institutions, and contribute in the ways of valuable integration services, hosting services, and support services. So they are Internet2 industry members, but the key piece beyond just the industry membership is the participation in the InCommon community. Next slide. So why is this important? Identity is getting, it has been complicated for a while, but now it's getting even more complicated, in part because of all the various offerings that are out in the marketplace. So we have a community of practitioners that understand best practices, that have understanding around architecture, implementation, and so forth. And there's common use cases, there are common needs that higher education and research have that the corporate sector doesn't necessarily support. Now, that said, the corporate sector may have solutions that are very, very good at supporting things like identity governance and pieces that you need as a campus practitioner and as a campus architect or IT director to support the enterprise and beyond use cases that you have. What we're finding is that organizations are implementing both corporate solutions, and then where those don't necessarily fit, they may reach to an open source solution to support those. They're also moving from necessarily supporting open source uses of connecting into the InCommon Federation to access services like learning management systems like Canvas, or National Institutes of Health or National Science Foundation services. And they're looking to host and bridge those kind of connections between the Federation and other corporate solutions like Entra or Okta. All of these are perfectly reasonable and awesome solutions, but it takes an organization, a company, a partner that understands your opportunities, both on the corporate side and the open source side, to help you walk that path into how do you actually source what you do? How do you actually source your solutions and address the challenges that you have in supporting your organization? So InCommon keeps these folks pretty close. We keep them close in terms of letting them know and helping them understand where we're going, how they can contribute, and we share solutions around what are we seeing across university and campus marketplace, and what is it that we can collectively do with the InCommon community to move the ball ahead for everyone. So hosted solutions when you need those, or expertise, if that's what you're looking for, across open source and corporate solutions. It allows with community best practices. The goal here is to support research and education use cases that are key to your organizational mission. And it provides peace of mind. They are pre-vetted organizations. In many cases, InCommon has contracted with almost all, I think, all of the InCommon catalysts ourselves. So you can feel rest assured that these are good folks to deal with and to do business with and to support your mission. So with that, I'm going to hand over the microphone to the next speaker, Deidre Chamberlain from Cirrus.
Hi there, I'm Deidre, CEO of Cirrus Identity, and I get to kick us off today with our first trend that we'll be discussing. And I chose to bring up the trend of consolidation. One of the privileges of the role that I'm in right now is that I get to speak with lots of different campuses across the country on a regular basis. And we're definitely seeing a trend around consolidation. Next slide. There's two main aspects of consolidation that I'd like to mention. One is on the campus side, and a lot of consolidation, particularly around single sign-on. And the goal there really is to streamline, to reduce costs, to reduce vectors of attack, improve security, and also because a lot of staff who've been running on-prem solutions that have been chugging along for decades are retiring. And so it's an opportunity to kind of look at new ways to do things. And the other side of the consolidation is on the vendor and the market side, which I'll talk about in a second. When it comes to single sign-on consolidation, like Anne mentioned just a minute ago, one of the main things we're seeing is a desire to consolidate single sign-on to some of the large commercial providers like Microsoft Entra ID and Okta, for example. In addition to just consolidating SSO, one of the big drivers is also exploring the consolidation of MFA. So for example, once you consolidate SSO to Entra ID, formerly known as Azure Active Directory, you can also leverage Azure MFA and then potentially retire other MFA subscriptions you may have, like Duo, for example. But we're also seeing a lot of Duo customers who are running Duo MFA consolidating to Duo's single sign-on solution. So just looking at ways that you can eliminate certain big systems and components of your IAM architecture is a trend. On the vendor side, for those of you who don't already know, there's been a pretty significant consolidation. There's three big commercial identity companies, ForgeRock, Ping, and SailPoint, that have been acquired by the same private equity firm. And I think that is also triggering a lot of just movement within the IGA offerings out there, from Microsoft Entra ID governance to Okta's offerings. I think it's also an opportunity moving into like how the impact of this consolidation, how that might play out in terms of things you can do. First of all, but because there's a lot of movement in the market and a lot of attempts to gain market share in the IGA market, there's an opportunity for the higher ed community to potentially influence the direction of these products. But the reality is most of these commercial companies historically have really focused on the needs of large commercial companies. And unfortunately, they don't often build out the solutions that the higher ed market needs, even if we give them lots of feedback. So the other thing in terms of action is just to be aware of that, to look at open source solutions, to look at vendors that can help you really figure out how do these products work in my environment in higher ed. But most importantly, I just want to suggest that the most important action I think campuses can take is to build a solid foundation of identity governance, architecture, and bringing in all your stakeholders to understand the implications of various decisions around identity and access management, have good business process analysis, because whatever technology you pick has to be implemented in a good governance model with good stakeholder engagement and good business processes. In terms of a project to highlight for consolidation, to just kind of give you an example of this, I'm going to show a couple slides from an implementation Serious Identity did with SUNY Geneseo. And we actually presented with them last month at the IAM online, and there's a link in the slide deck here to that presentation. But if you go to the next slide, you'll see this is SUNY Geneseo before the project, where at the bottom there, they had lots of on-prem identity provider solutions. So they were running Microsoft's Active Directory on-prem. They were running CAS, the open source project on-prem, and also Simple SAML PHP. And so if you go to the next slide, the project that we worked on with them consolidated their single sign-on to Microsoft Entra ID. And the Cirrus CAS bridge filled the gap with some CAS applications that couldn't move to SAML. And then we also, they used our SAML bridge to bridge the gap to InCommon. And that SAML bridge is part of an architecture that's now published in Microsoft's reference architecture for multilateral federation. And they were able to retire their on-prem CAS and on-prem Simple SAML PHP. So that concludes my section. And I'm going to pass it on now to Simona from Evolvium.
Thank you, Deidre. So hello, everyone. My name is Simona, and I'm Business Development Representative at Evolvium, and I will talk about cybersecurity compliance as a trend for 2024. Next slide, please. In recent years, we've witnessed a dramatic surge in cybersecurity threats and attacks, posing significant challenges to organizations worldwide. As a result, there is an emphasis on compliance measures to mitigate these evolving risks and safeguard sensitive data. Organizations across industries have a strong incentive to get compliant with regulations in order to stay relevant in the globalized world. As we look into the trends for 2024, we see that cybersecurity compliance is no longer an option, but it's a necessity. Regulatory standards and requirements come from a variety of sources, and including like government entities, industry standards, and international organizations. Evolvium, as a vendor of the open source IGA product Midpoint, acknowledges the importance of adhering to regulations and compliance frameworks like the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, ISO 27000 series, and NIST 2, for example. But however, we are committed to extend this beyond cybersecurity, and Midpoint encompasses other aspects such as accessibility, with WCAG being integrated into Midpoint 2. So I'm also proud to highlight the ongoing efforts of Evolvium in anticipating and addressing compliance challenges, as we are evaluating Midpoint to see how it could help organizations stay compliant. And looking ahead, we are committed to developing built-in tooling such as compliance checklists and dashboards to further fortify our users' compliance journey, starting with ISO 27000, for example. It's also crucial to understand that aforementioned regulations and compliance frameworks are applicable towards institutions and processes within them, and products like Midpoint cannot be officially certified, but in spite of that, Midpoint can assist you in meeting the requirements necessary to qualify for compliance certification of your institution. Among our ongoing efforts, we are also preparing the statement of applicability, providing recommendations for Midpoint configuration, and enhancing our documentation. Next slide, please. Thank you. This slide presents the controls, which are specific items that organization needs to address to ensure compliance. And Evolvium is currently reviewing these controls and assessing how Midpoint can assist you. A summary is provided in a table on the left side of the slide, and our ongoing strategy involves continuously enhancing the documentation, as you can see the pictures on the right side, to show you how Midpoint features might align with your compliance needs. Currently, we are starting with ISO 27000, but there are plans to follow up with other regulations in the future. By examining the percentage breakdown on the left-hand side, we see the controls where Midpoint can offer the most assistance. While certain controls can't be fulfilled purely by technical aspects, additional processes are required to achieve full compliance. However, even in cases where physical compliance, for example, beyond software capabilities, is necessary, you can see that Midpoint can still address at least 14%, leaving the remainder to be ensured through physical practices and established processes. There isn't like ready-made solution for maintaining compliance effortlessly, but each organization must address this independently. However, we offer a tool that can significantly streamline this journey of yours. So in conclusion, as we go through 2024 and beyond, cybersecurity compliance will continue to shape the way organizations operate and thrive in digital world. And with Evolvium's Midpoint leading the charge, you can confidently embrace the challenges ahead, knowing that you have the tools and expertise to navigate this ever-changing landscape of cybersecurity compliance. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask during Q&A session. Thank you for your attention. Now I would like to give words to our next speaker, Paul. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Simona. My name is Paul Hodgson. I'm a CEO at Instrumental Identity. We're relatively new to the Catalyst program and happy to be part of the community. My two trends I wanted to focus here on are privileged access management and then SaaS IGA products. You can go to the next slide. So starting with privileged access management, we're starting to see schools that have kind of more modern identity programs and platforms in place. Usually privileged access management tends to be on the more tail end of that. So, schools try to focus on lifecycle management, maybe getting rid of a legacy homegrown solution, and then moving in towards access governance and privileged access management. So we're seeing a lot more kind of trends in the market with schools going out to bid or looking at procuring PAM tools. Some of the ones that are pretty common that we see are CyberArk and BeyondTrust. I think where, BombGuard kind of had a pretty good reputation in the higher ed community with the remote assistance appliances. BeyondTrust has a pretty good product in that space. And we're starting to kind of see again, schools kind of trying to, mitigate any sort of breaches, any sort of insider threats. With some of the big, news that's been in the news, some of the big news headlines lately with the breaches and having data leaked out, securing those privileged accounts is pretty critical for any organization. And these tools are pretty impressive. They, will monitor your session, kind of do credential lifecycle management, really kind of gives us auditors a better kind of grasp on how you're kind of controlling these privileged access accounts and eliminating things for like shared passwords and root credentials and things like that. And then I guess the next trend I want to get into is SaaS IGA projects. So I think this, if you were to talk to people about 5 years ago about having identity in the cloud, most people would always say, not in my backyard, we don't want our identities out in the cloud. And I think that kind of has evolved over time. Most ERP products, most learning management systems, email platforms, whatever enterprise level application you have now, typically that's all SaaS hosted. So I think that kind of paved the way for having universities being more open towards having a SaaS product, especially an identity management product. And there's really been a big kind of change over the years, and those products are evolving pretty quickly to kind of meet the needs in the market, especially in the higher education space. I know we partner with some of the vendors that offer SaaS IGA products, and they're consistently looking for us for feedback, and also working with our existing higher ed clients too to really kind of put in what it is that higher ed needs, because we all know that higher ed has kind of a different use case than most corporations. I think if you're looking at a SaaS product too, just be aware it comes with some trade-offs. Gone are the days of maybe having 3-4 different environments that you have to kind of manage on-prem. Most SaaS products are going to offer you, maybe like 2 tenants. There's also going to be some trade-offs with the technologies that are used. A lot of homegrown systems are probably written in Perl or C# or some sort of legacy scripting language, and you're going to have to adapt and make sure you have the skill sets capable for handling things like Java or some kind of more modern frameworks. And then I think the other thing to look at too is just making sure that where you fit in your business complexity with identity governance and identity and access management. How adaptable can you be towards a SaaS product? And I think I would really try to encourage people to, if they're looking at a SaaS product, do your requirements up front. Where are business processes kind of broken today, or where do you have a lot of complexity in your code? Where has there been something developed 20 years ago that no one understands, and really kind of pave the way for a good roadmap for you to kind of move to a SaaS product. You're not going to be able to do a lot of complex things with most SaaS solutions, and that goes across for any product. And just kind of make sure you're ready for that. And then, there are some products out there that are both SaaS IGA products that also have different components like single sign-on or PAM in them. So, kind of, again, do your research there, look at what it is that your organization needs. I would encourage all of you to, if you're looking at this, work with vendors, get labs set up, talk to a Catalyst partner. That's kind of what we're here for. We can kind of give you, our insights and our experience and where we see these products, and just kind of make sure you're choosing the best tool that meets your needs. So I'll turn it over to Jim at Moran Technologies.
Thanks, Paul. Hello, my name is Jim Van Landeham, Principal IAM Architect with Moran Technology. The trend I'm discussing today is regarding the redefining of IAM in higher education. Next slide, please. Over the past 20 years, I've worked with about 100 different higher education focused clients, including colleges, universities, university and state systems, consortiums, teaching hospitals, research institutions, etc. Based on my most recent experiences in the field with many of our clients, we're seeing some kind of well-established and emerging patterns in higher education that are having a major impact on the industry as a whole, but more specifically, trends that are affecting the technologies we use to provide the identities and the access that's required to teach, to learn, conduct research, provide care, etc. So for example, many higher education institutions are experiencing issues with shrinking enrollment. Those are compounded by fierce competition, decreased funding, not to mention, societal changes like the normalcy of hybrid remote learning and work, increasing demand for internet native perspective on user experience, and even eroding perceptions of the value of higher education. Those are capital and regulatory stresses that are also forcing institutions to adopt complex solutions to satisfy requirements like from cyber insurance providers or due to privacy regulations. Schools are responding to this by expanding non-traditional, non-degree programs, expanding 100% online offerings, intensifying their focus on research to kind of offset and adapt to losses in enrollment and diversify, where they're investing, their time and energy. So some schools are even turning to reducing overhead and redundancy, or even going as far as establishing consortiums and consolidating IT services to become more competitive. Next slide, please. So responses to these changes in the higher education landscape are usually predicated on utilizing technology, right? Technology is going to solve a lot of these problems. So these complex and emerging trends are placing an increasing burden on IT, specifically to adapt and support the organization's needs with more complex technologies. Initiatives spawned by these needs tend to include things like more complex business practices that need a modernized ERP deployment, which requires more flexible and efficient identity, data, and access management. The need to offer a course a learner can pay for and take right away requires transaction-based real-time identity provisioning. Removing barriers and obstacles from and streamlining student recruitment requires identifying and tracking people and their actions sooner through CRM modernization and customer IAM initiatives. Privacy regulations and inclusivity initiatives change requirements for how people can manage their identities and grant consent on how their information is used. Cyber insurance and identity as a security perimeter needs more robust PAM solutioning and greater control around how elevated privileges are used in the organization. And providing everything a person needs on their first day requires a rationalized approach to access governance designed to be easily understood by the people requesting it. Growth in research requires increased collaboration and real-time provisioning for people that may not be in an ERP system, but are still on campus and still need access to resources. Next slide, please. So the point of all this is to assert that responding to these changes in the higher education sector with new ideas, new businesses, and new technologies requires a mature IAM program. The key to a mature IAM program is spending the time to understand the greatest needs of your most critical stakeholders, students, faculty, staff, practitioners, researchers, et cetera, and collaborating with business stakeholders and aligning those needs with the needs of the business, working together with a holistic perspective on how to redesign processes that will enable the technologies and defining boundaries and enforcing them with policy to ensure execution of your mission. All that really equates to is the fact that IAM can either be the biggest blocker to your modernization initiatives, or it can be an agent for digital transformation. It just depends on how you approach it. Thanks for your time. I'll turn things over to Drew.
Okay, so my name is Drew Kapner. I'm an engineer at Omnibond, and the trend that I chose to spotlight today is passwordless authentication. Next slide, please. So at Omnibond, we really feel like 2024 is the year of the tipping point for passwordless. So when I was preparing for this presentation, I started by thinking about what would be necessary for that to happen, for the tipping point to happen this year, and for us to start, heading more quickly towards widespread adoption. And I kind of came up with 4 points that I think are all necessary. So the first one of those points is we need a will to eliminate passwords. And then we also need ubiquitous passkey support across major platforms. And then we also need knowledge with end users. And that knowledge kind of has 2 components. They need to have knowledge of what passkeys are, what the benefits are, and why they should want to use them. And then they also need to be able to learn how to use passkeys. So with that kind of foundation laid, I think it's interesting to kind of take an accounting of where we are right now. So in terms of having will to eliminate passwords, we've gotten there and then gone further already. From a security point of view, we all know that phishing is a huge risk. It's the #1 source of cyber attacks. And now with pretty much every organization fretting about the threat of ransomware, it's even more of a problem because most ransomware attacks start with email phishing. And then when you layer in the cost of remediating ransomware, the the potential damage from phishing is really tremendous. I think the number that EDUCAUSE put out was about 1.42 million for the average higher ed institution. And then if things weren't bad enough, we've now got generative AI, which is another tool in the belt of bad actors who are increasing the intensity of their phishing attacks, increasing both quantity and quality. And then security alone is not the only reason that we have to get rid of passwords. We all know that passwords have been one of the greatest UX challenges on the internet. We all have password fatigue. And a lot of folks do weird, kludgy things to try to avoid, remembering passwords. And sometimes those things in and of themselves become attack vectors that we have to worry about. And then more recently, we've tried to kind of shore up some of the gaps with passwords using MFA, but MFA adoption is lagging. It's really challenging to roll out. Every time I sit in a presentation about MFA rollout, I hear about these heroic efforts that institutions are taking, trying to get people enrolled in MFA. And then another issue with MFA is, as much as there's password fatigue, there's MFA fatigue. The first experience that people have with MFA is a negative one, and it's always a negative one after that. It's just interrupting and bothering them. So people are hesitant to adopt MFA once they've experienced it. So moving on to kind of passkey support, the key piece there actually came in 2022 when we had a major announcement from Microsoft, Apple, and Google, where they all expressed their intent to support the passkey standard, which is the standard that the industry is sort of consolidated around in terms of passwordless support. Next slide. So the last thing that we need is knowledge. And I think the way that happens is similar to the way that traditional MFA is rolled out. Institutions wanting to increase or improve their security posture are going to roll it out and give people their first taste. We have Google already making passkeys their default authentication method. The difference with passkeys versus traditional MFA is that when people get their first taste of passkeys, they want them everywhere. And I think this is where we see this tipping point that I've been talking about. So I think this is going to be an exciting year for passkeys and passwordless. And if you're wondering why I know so much about it, it's because we have a product called Omni Passkey, which provides drop-in passkey support for Shibboleth. So whether you want to talk about that or just have questions about passwordless in general, I've learned a lot, building that product, and I'd be happy to talk about it. My email is there, drew@omnibond.com. So I'll go ahead and pass things over to Stefan.
Hi, folks. Stephen Fox, Provision IAM. The trend that we're going to talk about this time is System for Cross-Domain Identity Management, also known as SCIM2. Next slide, please. So the System for Cross-Domain Identity Management is being widely accepted as a standard protocol for user provisioning. And there's a very simple reason why this is going to be the case. SCIM2 finally came around in about 2015. So you'd say, well, is this really a trend? Well, what is also a trend is software as a service. A lot of the vendors, software vendors right now are offering software as a service for a lot of different reasons. Cloud is a big thing. And when you have a cloud service provider, you need to be able to provision users and deprovision users when they come on board to your organization. So SCIM2 is a really handy way to do it. It's what we call a well-defined RESTful web service for identity management. So, and there are two, of course, if it's RESTful, there's two perspectives. There's a server perspective and there's a client perspective. So second item here is like Okta, Microsoft, Oracle, NetIQ, SailPoint, OneLogin offer SCIM2 client support, which allows them as service providers to provision applications that are outside of their domain. Then the cloud service providers like Salesforce, Amazon Web Services, Slack, Azure Active Directory, Entra ID, Zoom, quite a bit of others, they offer what we call a server support, which means if you want to provision users on their service, they support SCIM2. So SCIM2's got pretty, it's got a lot better. Here's some of the differences between SCIM1 and SCIM2. It's got a richer data model, improved authentication with AAuth2, with OAuth2. And one would think is better optimized for security and performance, and it's a lot more flexible. Next slide, please. So you would think that SCIM2 as a standard would be plug and play, but it's really not. It gives the vendor a lot of different options, because what you do is, when you define a user, you can have a different schema. A user can have lots of different attributes, or you can have things like groups and roles. And if you start taking a survey of these providers, you'll find that they all implement it slightly differently. So you can't really have an optimized connector or optimized interface to SCIM2 that's going to work for everybody, unless you do a little work. So what we're doing this year is we're adding SCIM2 support to the Trusted Access platform with Midpoint. So if any of you guys in the higher ed are using Midpoint for provisioning and deprovisioning, you can expect to get SCIM2 support if you don't already have it. Now, what we recently, a company called DASI offers a SCIM2 service provider for Midpoint. And that is basically a client to Midpoint, meaning that if you have a SCIM2 interface, you can provision, you can send data into Midpoint that Evolvium offers. And so what we're building is not a client to Midpoint, but a client to whatever service provider you want to connect to, that you provision to. And because we see it as being not plug and play, what we think is going to end up is you're going to get an ability to use orchestration and automation capabilities within Evolvium's Midpoint to actually take you through the last mile. So what we expect to do is we expect to give you something that's flexible and workable, and then allow you to add your expertise on top of Midpoint to make it actually work for a wide variety of endpoints. I think I'm going to hand that over. I'm not going to go any further. But if you're interested in SCIM2, come talk to us. Scarice is up.
Thanks, Stefan. Hi, I'm Sharice Arrowwood, Executive Director of Business Development with InCommon. For those of you who don't know, InCommon has actually provided technology consulting support for higher education for over 30 years. I'm real excited to be here today as one of the catalysts to talk about the IAM really growth and transformation as a trend going into 2024. I'm specifically going to talk to management in the cloud. The next page, please. Thank you. So management in the cloud, Sharice, this sounds like a lot to talk about, and it really is. So as you've heard already from previous speakers, talking about identity and access management solutions in the cloud and being supported in the cloud has been out for several years, right? Many people are running in the cloud today, or maybe hybrid solutions. Some of them haven't quite tipped their toes in those cloud infrastructure opportunities yet. What I'm really focusing on is the management of the identity applications coupled with those cloud infrastructures in the cloud. A little redundant there, sorry about that. Application as well as infrastructure tied together. So let's back up a little bit and talk about some of the trends that we're seeing that really require this as a need for higher education and research. One of the things, and again, you've heard several, is enhanced security. Regardless if you're talking to your peers, you're watching the news, listening to the community, there's security around us at all times. And that's something we need to be very much aware of. We need to look at the applications that we're using, and we need to do what we can to stop anything from influencing, hurting or damaging the users, as well as the colleges and universities that we're all proud to work at. So that's a key thing. The other thing is automation. When you look at the applications as well as the architecture, you want automation. So when you're making those choices, when you want to onboard or offboard somebody, or you have a faculty member who wants to take some classes, those roles will change. The groups that they're associated will change to allow for the provisioning appropriately. You want automation. You don't want to do those manual changes. And there's several use cases. You want extensibility, right? You want to be able to take advantage of those integration points to add additional opportunities, some of which you've heard of today, as well as you want to be able to have the infrastructure paired so well with those applications that when they have those new upgrades or the security patches that come out, that really you can take advantage of them right away because your provider actually has a non-production system ready for you. It can be deployed, you can walk through the testing, and then having that automation in place, you're able to then move over to your production environment with the help of that trusted vendor. Sustainability. Now that's a big thing I want you to think about, because a lot of times there's so much going on in identity access management. We want a Band-Aid, we want to fix it for our customer. If that's a client, if it's faculty, if it's staff, whoever that might be, we want to make sure it's resolved. Take a step back and look at the future, right? Look 5 to 10 years out. What's going to be sustainable? So one of the things I'm talking about here specifically from InCommon is taking advantage of the open source ITAP bundle, primarily Shiv, Midpoint Grouper, and of course there's Command there for those specific use cases. Those are open source tools that really meet these requirements, coupled with the hosting trusted vendor. Of course, InCommon can assist with that. But what I'm really getting at is the next piece that's often thought about, but I don't even really see in writing very much, and that's the employees of your identity and access management teams. Everybody understands at any college and university, when it comes to IAM, there's very high expectations of your clients, right? Those students, that staff, the faculty. I've ever been able to get in, sign in, get to those tools and resources in a timely manner, and not know anything about what's going on under the covers. And that's what we want, because when we know that they're happy, that means we don't have that support queue growing or that phone ringing. But when there's an issue, boy, does that happen. And what happens to your staff? They have to switch priorities, forget about what they had planned. They've got to make sure they take care of those issues. So you want to think about the applications and the value that management in the cloud from a trusted vendor can provide you. What does it realize? What are the results of that? Not only will it free up some of your employees' time, allowing them to maybe focus on some of those responsibilities they've not been able to do before, but it also may take some additional time off your shoulders, because I'm aware of many colleges and university today, at least clients of ours, who've been looking to interview and hire that domain expertise. IAM is very complex and it's not easy to come about those people. So if you're able to reduce staff, that's actually another benefit. And then the big one right at the top there, reduce stress for everybody. Being able to work and deploy an IAM software solution that meets the needs at your institution, as well as get the support of a trusted vendor like InCommon to be able to manage not just the architecture, but also the applications. That's a perfect pairing. But now, how do you decide what's right for you, what makes the most sense? Because there are so many opportunities out there. There are so many different directions you can go in. InCommon recommends you taking a step back and taking a holistic view. Where are you today? Where do you want to go? And have your priorities line up strategically with what you have in place and what everybody at the institution really needs. Of course, we can assist with that, but regardless, that's something imperative that we recommend that you do. Here's just some questions to think about, but based on time, I'm going to move on. If you can move to the next slide page. Next slide, please. So here are some project highlights. InCommon have been providing hosting managed services for several years now, and we really started in California and hit it hard. So here's just some examples where initially we started with providing hosting in IDP, your IDP in the cloud, which has been very successful, allowed colleges and universities to really dip their toes in the water and see the value of combining the ITAP bundle along with the cloud services. I'm calling out Purdue as a second example really quick here to say, really taking a step back and looking at what you need makes a difference. And in their decisions, after they reviewed the results of the evaluation, decided we need to move away from a custom solution at IAM. We need to get to something that's modern, that's secure, that's extendable, that's automated. And yes, they moved into the ITAP bundle. Currently working with Shibboleth, and we are now deploying Midpoint and Grouper to follow. That was the path that worked for them. And my overall message is to really take that time to look at where you are, because there's so many options. Identify a trusted vendor, which InCommon would love to be one of, but there's also several catalysts that can help you. If you're interested in hearing more about InCommon's Navigate Identity, open source hosted and managed solution, reach out to me. Thank you so much. And I'm going to hand it over to Netta.
Thanks, Charisse. Okay, last but not least, I am diving into trend number 8. Data security through IAM shouldn't be about higher walls, but about smarter gates. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm Netta Caligari, community lead at Westeret, and I'm going to be touching on the critical role that IAM plays in unlocking research metadata, which many of us know, is data about data, the information on research publications, authors, grants, research facilities, and so forth. So I'm going to start off with a quick story that kind of illustrates the challenge. At Westeret, we had a really interesting conversation with a university that has a really robust and diverse collection of metadata points from all different areas. Great, right? Now, understanding that this is really a goldmine of information for the institution, we asked them how they utilize said metadata. And the response was actually really surprising. They said, actually not that much, because there's really sensitive information as well that we can't let many people see. And so my point of quickly sharing that example is that there really is a fundamental dilemma in academic research, which is access to the metadata that I speak of. And this narrative is not uncommon in higher ed. There is a balance between securing and sharing research metadata, and it's really tricky. So it's tightly controlled, accessible only to a limited few, primarily due understandably to those concerns about who can see what. But however, the key is, again, going back to the trend, isn't about us continuing to have higher walls, but the solution really lies within those smarter gates. So IAM systems should support providing really granular access to this information so that it ensures that security without stifling the collaboration or innovation that needs to happen at these institutions. So the question we face now is how to achieve this delicate balance, making that a lever for growth and not just a locked away asset that those who need it most can't get to. And what we need to keep in mind as well is that this larger picture here, it really concerns not just the access itself, but the implications that it has on the university's ability to do really important work. Quick example, research departments, right, depend heavily on winning grants for funding. So access to detailed research metadata can really be a game changer in this process. However, the current scenario that I'm discussing often restricts this to really just like high-level administrators, sometimes limiting its utility to those who are actually actively involved in making the day-to-day grant-related decisions. Next slide, please. So as we pivot towards IAM solutions that could potentially help, it's essential to understand the intricate relationship between RIMS and identity management. IAM attributes, the data points within IAM system that define the user's identity, such as their role, permissions, project involvement, et cetera, really are the key to tailoring access to research metadata precisely and dynamically. And if you're a visual person, imagine a RIM system where access isn't an all or nothing scenario, but is nuanced based on the unique role or involvement of a researcher in a specific project. This ensures that everyone from, say, the VP of research to a departmental researcher and those in between are granted access to exactly what they need, nothing less, nothing more. And you can empower your RIMs when you really do have that those sophisticated attributes that can be based on a variety of scenarios, whether it's, for example, NIH certifications, respecting cultural heritage sensitivities, navigating national security restrictions. There really are a myriad of ways to establish attributes. And the beauty of it is that we have so much collective wisdom, right, in this community. But I will say, I also understand that sometimes it can be hard just to find an investment in your IAM infrastructure. So if you need one, research metadata is really a great reason, because it's undeniable that every research university will face this necessity. And this not only encourages cross-disciplinary collaboration, but it really does so, again, without compromising that data security. This approach, and what we hope to see as a continuing growing trend, is pivotal in breaking down those silos between departments, researchers and students, and so much more. So as a next step, I would encourage you to connect with your research department and work to understand their needs so that you can start thinking through a path forward. And of course, using this community as support. And in conclusion, I'll just say really quick that the point I want to come across is that IAM is really not just a tool for data protection, but it is a catalyst, no pun intended, for academic innovation when it comes to research. And so by finally tuning access to what you need through attributes, we can really open those doors up where both data security and research collaboration can advance together. And at Westeret, we are active collaborators in this space, and we're really on the journey with you to kind of unravel this and solve for the quandaries of research metadata and how it's being accessed and unified. So let's connect and learn from each other. We always welcome conversations in this space. My contact information is posted there on the slide, and please reach out anytime. Thank you so much. And I will go ahead and turn it over to Anne for Q&A.
Thanks, Netta. Thanks, everybody. What a great diversity of topics today. I think, Netta, your last one that you talked about with the research metadata is specifically, very timely when you start thinking about the open data requirements that federal agencies will start requiring on federally funded grants. Fits right into what you just discussed. So the lines are open for questions. You can submit them through the Q&A function at the bottom of Zoom. I have a couple of, however, in the back pocket that I think hopefully are pretty timely. So Jim, you presented kind of a nice overview of several trends in higher education, and this is not a question just for you, obviously, but your presentation kind of sparked a little thought about something called Study Hall, which was a partnership between Arizona State University and another organization to offer a YouTube channel to learners who maybe don't have quite the assurance or are not sure that they can be successful students at an institution. And so it's a way of kind of offering courses in a really low risk way. And they can sort of take a few of the classes and then actually end up with credit if that's something they'd like to do, to then transfer that to Arizona. So Arizona State. So it's a really interesting way of opening up, right, the idea of what a higher education institution's mission is, and how do you bring in folks who wouldn't maybe normally go to college. The upshot, though, is they have millions and millions of identities, because you can imagine this is something is very new, and it's very attractive for folks who are maybe not interested in university career, but just are interested in the courses. So just kind of to the catalyst, what kind of recommendations would you make to to a university or a college that's looking to offer more of a consumer focused service like this? Because there's pieces of access for sure, but there's also a little customer relationship management and tracking who's there, what they've taken, and so forth. So it's sort of a little bit of a flip on access. And of course, the scale is quite large. Thoughts about what kind of recommendations would you give organizations looking to spin something like this up?
I don't want to preclude anyone else from speaking, but I can say that, you know, a big amount of our recent clients have asked a very similar question, like how do we make things more available to learners that maybe aren't necessarily following the traditional path into education? And so, you know, the answer to that is to, you know, taking a play out of the book of e-commerce and saying, let's think about external identities as a relationship between, you know, a customer and an organization, and say, you know, we don't have to know everything about them. We don't have to create email accounts and identities for them, right? We can interact with these people on a basis that is a little bit less formal. And so you take that relationship and you try to work in the need for, you know, giving someone a short-term identity or an identity that's based on, you know, a kind of a learner-focused engagement. And traditional identity doesn't really do it that well. We have a lot of solutions for things like researchers, and we have solutions for, you know, things like non-traditional learning that are, you know, really focused on providing that internal identity. So the idea is to treat that relationship a little bit differently, and to, you know, start using the information you have coming in as an external, creating those identities earlier, and then creating a situation where if that person decides to become a full-time student, right, that you have their information, you continue to manage that relationship all the way through from external coming into internal, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. It's a little bit different than, you know, when I was working in identity and access management at a smaller school, where we would do a similar thing, but for like students coming in for a basketball camp, for instance, that are junior high, and you sort of keep track of those folks, and at some point you start recruiting them, right, as the next student class. It's a much bigger scale. Deidre, you had a comment that you wanted to share?
Oh, sure. I just put something in the chat there that when you're starting to provide educational resource, any online service to people outside of your core constituency, your students, faculty, and staff at your campus, those could be students from other campuses, high school students who are taking advantage of courses, campuses collaborating with community colleges. Suddenly you have a situation where you're trying to trust identities from multiple different sources. Some of them are self-asserted, like personal accounts, Google, Microsoft, LinkedIn accounts. And one of the things that's really important is to look at lifecycle management, you know, when you onboard those users, where they come from. And then oftentimes people might come in with a self-asserted personal account, but at some point they actually matriculate, enroll in your school. It's the same person. So having mechanisms to link those users, link those identities across multiple different systems, organizations, credential providers, that's a key need in this space in my mind.
Yeah, for sure. Other comments from other catalysts? All right, while you're thinking of that, we did get a question. I see, Drew, you're responding, but I'll just read it aloud for those in the audience land. With respect to the appetite or will to move away from passwords, a major hurdle for that is internal external audit or the risk posture of general counsel. Are there any best practices for pitching the strengths of moving to passwordless that resonate with those audiences? Really good question. Drew, do you want to take first stab?
Yeah, I just put an answer there, and I'll give voice to it as well. So I think kind of some of the things I talked about, phishing primarily, you know, phishing, and then also ransomware as it relates to phishing. These are the things that keep folks up at night. And if you can help people understand how they can, virtually eliminate phishing and significantly reduce ransomware risk through passwordless authentication, I think that'll get you a long way there. And then there is, depending on who you're talking to, there are challenges with explaining passkeys and things because you're dealing with a little bit of cryptography and things like that. So you may or may not be able to just explain how this works from a technical point of view, but I would say appealing to statements from those big players that I mentioned, Google, Apple, Microsoft, and how bought in they are on this is also going to be a big help. And I think, things will also get easier as those players do things like what Google has done of, putting passwordless as their primary authentication method. I think it's kind of, as I mentioned, I think we'll see a tipping point. It's just going to get real obvious that this is the thing to do. So hopefully those are some ideas.
Yeah, and I think another thing that could address that too, or could help with general counsel's concern is it's a way of mitigating, addressing risk, but it also makes the user experience a lot more pleasant. So having those two, it's rare to have those two pieces together. And so I think doing the right thing, incentives for doing that is also, I think would be a really great thought for that. So thanks, everyone. I'm going to hand the microphone back over to April to close us out.
Hello again, everyone. I want to thank our presenters this afternoon. Thank you, Deirdre, Simona, Paul, Jim, Drew, Stephen, Charisse, and Netta for sharing those critical trends in IAM with us this afternoon, and to Anne for moderating, and to all of you for joining us, whether you posed a question or just listened in. We appreciate you being here this afternoon. And also, I want a special thanks to Jennifer and Susan and our entire Internet 2 meetings team. They make it possible for us to bring IAM online to you each and every month. And before we sign off, I want to remind you again that this webinar was recorded. Both the slides and the recording will be posted to our website shortly. And we will be back again next month, but also want to remind you there's a short survey that you can take as you're exiting the webinar. We value and appreciate your feedback. And we will be back again next month for another edition of IAM Online. Our topic is going to be Zero Trust. So again, thank you. Have a great rest of the day.